Gods of Olympus, titans of legend, and monsters straight out of nightmares. We're about to go back in time to meet some of the most terrifying creatures from Greek mythology. First up, we have to talk about Medusa, the only monster on this list that wasn't actually killed by Perseus. She was the daughter of the sea god Phorcys, and the sister of the monsters Theno and Euryale. The three sisters were so hideous that they scared everyone away, but their heads would eventually become famous for a different reason.
Ho, ho, ho!
You see, Medusa was once a beautiful woman who was punished by Athena and turned into a monstrous Gorgon. The goddess was angry at Medusa because she had slept with Poseidon in her temple. And though it wasn't Medusa's fault, she got turned into a creature with the face of a hideous old woman and hair made of living venomous snakes. Not only could Medusa turn people to stone with her appearance, but her very breath could also kill mortals. It took the combined efforts of Athena and the hero Perseus to finally slay the Gorgon.
Ho, ho, ho!
So, if you ever come across one of these snake ladies, try not to stare at her too long or breathe too deeply, and you should be fine. Moving on, let's talk about Chimera, the first creature born of two different animal parts. This monster's parents were the sea monster Typhoon and the goddess Gaia. So, it is no surprise that it grew up to be absolutely massive with the head of a lion, a goat's head sprouting from its back, and a snake for a tail.
Ho, ho, ho!
Its breath was said to emit fire, and its roars were loud enough to shake the foundations of the earth. So, how did the world get rid of such a scary monster? Well, it took the great hero Bellerophon and his magical horse, Pegasus, to finally defeat the beast. As soon as Bellerophon mounted Pegasus and gave it the reins made of gold, the horse soared through the air towards the sun, chased by the flying Chimera.
Ho, ho, ho!
But when the monster got too close to the sun, its golden underbelly melted, and it fell to the ground, where Bellerophon stabbed it with a spear. That must have hurt like hell. Now let's take a look at Cerberus, probably the most well-known hellhound in all of mythology. This vicious dog monster was the offspring of the monster Typhon, and Echidna, and the sworn guardian of the entrance to the underworld. Its fur was said to be as impenetrable as a shield, and its breath could snuff out the life of anyone unfortunate enough to inhale it.
Ho, ho, ho!
No wonder everyone was afraid of crossing paths with this guy. One day, though, the hero Heracles came to the entrance of the underworld and demanded that Cerberus be allowed to roam freely on the surface for a day. Hades agreed, but warned him to be careful. Of course, Heracles went ahead and unleashed the hellhound anyway. Chaos ensued as Cerberus ran around killing everyone in sight until Heracles wrestled it to the ground and put an end to its reign of terror.
Ho, ho, ho!
That was quite the adventure, but I think the craziest part is that Heracles led it back to the underworld without even being bitten. That guy was clearly a beast himself. You know, while we're on the topic of heroes slaying monsters, we have to give some love to Theseus, the man who hunted down and killed the Minotaur. Now, if you've never heard of the Minotaur, let me catch you up. It was a creature with the head of a bull and the body of a man, which means it was basically the product of Zeus's many affairs.
Ho, ho, ho!
One day, Zeus turned into a white bull and kidnapped the beautiful maiden Europa and carried her off to the island of Crete. There she gave birth to the Minotaur. To hide the monster's existence from his wife, Hera, King Minos kept it locked up in a labyrinth, but word still got out and Theseus decided to take matters into his own hands. He entered the labyrinth, found the Minotaur, and killed it with his sword.
Ho, ho, ho!
Now, to be honest, we're not exactly sure if the Minotaur was a scary monster or just misunderstood, since it's really hard to tell with creatures that can't speak. But either way, we can't deny that it's one of the most recognizable beasts from Greek mythology. Speaking of creatures you probably recognize, next we have to talk about Scylla, a monster that's been terrifying sailors since the days of Homer.
Ho, ho, ho!
Her origins are unknown, but we do know that she was once a beautiful woman who was transformed into a hideous monster after catching the attention of a god. In Homer's Odyssey, he tells the story of how Odysseus managed to escape her clutches. According to the poem, Scylla lived on a rock off the coast of Italy and had 6 heads and 12 feet. And whenever a ship passed by, she would reach out with her heads and drag as many men as she could into the water and devour them.
Ho, ho, ho!
Odysseus knew that going near the rock was dangerous, but he had no choice if he wanted to save his crew. So he steered his ship as close as he could and sacrificed 6 men to Scylla, just barely managing to escape her grasp himself. Depending on who you ask, there are different versions of this story with different numbers of heads and feet, but one thing remains constant: don't go anywhere near Scylla. Now let's take a look at the Hydra, a multi-headed serpent that breathed poison.
Ho, ho, ho!
Some say it was the offspring of the sea monster Typhon and Gaia, while others believe it was created by Hera as punishment for King Lernion. Either way, it grew up to be a gigantic snake with 9 heads, each one more poisonous than the last. It is no surprise then that it took the hero Heracles 2 whole days to finally slay the beast. Even then, he had help from his companion, Iolaus. If you want to hear more about this battle, check out our full video about Heracles.
Ho, ho, ho!
But here's the short version. First, Heracles shot the Hydra with one of his poisonous arrows, then used his sword to cut off one of its heads. The problem was that for every head he cut off, 2 more would grow back in its place. So Heracles called over Iolaus and told him to cauterize each wound with a burning torch. Iolaus did as he was told, and after all 9 of its heads were cut off, the Hydra didn't grow any new ones. Finally, Heracles dragged its body back to his home and hung it from a chariot.
Ho, ho, ho!
Victory was his, but this wasn't the last we'd see of this monster. Its poisonous blood would later be used by the hero Theseus to kill the Marathonian bull. Next, let's look at the Orthrus, a 2-headed dog monster who guarded the cattle of the giant Geryon. You might remember Geryon from our video about Heracles' second labors, where we talked about how the hero slew the giant and stole his cattle. But what you might not remember is that Geryon had 2 heads, which is kind of important.
Ho, ho, ho!
When Heracles tried to steer the cattle towards the river to drive them to Eurytion, one of Geryon's heads bit him on the leg. That's why Heracles whipped the dog, which caused it to drop both of its heads. Our boy Heracles, never one to miss an opportunity, picked up the heads and offered them to Apollo. They say the god was so impressed with his courage that he accepted them as a gift. So that's where the Orthrus's story ends, which isn't something we can say about the final creature on our list, the Titan Atlas.
Ho, ho, ho!
This guy had quite the tragic fate. You see, Atlas was the son of the Titan god Iapetus and the brother of Prometheus. When Cronus and his fellow Titans waged war against the gods of Olympus, Atlas stood bravely by his father's side. But when the gods won the war, they threw him into Tartarus, the deepest part of the underworld. And they sentenced him to spend the rest of eternity holding up the sky. To make things even worse, he was cursed to never be able to pass on his immortality to anyone else.
Ho, ho, ho!
That means that unlike other monsters on this list, Atlas will suffer forever. The only good news is that according to some accounts, the hero Heracles ventured into hell to rescue his friend and bring him back to the land of the living. So maybe Atlas is finally resting in peace. We can only hope. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Ho, ho, ho!